Welcome to Measuring Success Right, the official podcast of the Marriott Student Review, a podcast for students by students, where we connect the leaders of tomorrow with the issues of today.
Need to be relentlessly focused on the customer, or the listener, as we say. But it's the same thing. It's the exact same thing.
Hello and welcome to Measuring Success Right. I am today's host, Grant Frazier, and I am so excited to introduce today's interview with Robert Smith. We had a fantastic discussion about his upbringing in Utah, about his long career in public radio, and about how starting a podcast is just like starting any other business. So without further ado, here's the interview. Robert Smith is a host for NPR's Planet Money, where he tells stories about how the global economy is affecting our lives. Planet Money has been known to set economic indicators to music, use superheroes to explain central banks, and even buy a toxic asset just to figure it out. Now, Smith admits that he has no special background in finance or math, just a curiosity about how money works. And that's the kind of curiosity that has driven Smith for his 20 years in radio. Before joining Planet Money, Smith was the New York correspondent for NPR. He was responsible for covering all the mayhem and beauty that makes it the greatest city on Earth. Smith reported on the rebuilding of Ground Zero, the stunning landing of U.S. Air Flight 1549 in the Hudson River, and the dysfunctional world of New York City politics. Before his New York City gig, Smith worked for public radio stations in Seattle, Salt Lake City, and Portland. He's been an editor, a host, a news director, and just about any other job you can think of in broadcasting. Robert Smith, thank you so much for coming on to Measuring Success Right.
It is great to be here. Anytime.
Honestly, I am such a big fan of Planet Money that this is just incredibly exciting to me. You're like my Beyonce, so this is a big deal. So honestly, we're just so glad to have you.
Well, if everyone could see me, I am dancing. So that's the Beyonce part, yeah.
It's true, everyone. He is. He's been doing it the whole time. So just to get us started today, I wanted to talk about something that I think our listeners will find interesting, which is that you grew up in Utah yourself, didn't you?
I am a Utahn. I consider myself. I wasn't born there, but I went to high school in Park City and, in fact, started in radio at KPCW in Park City, a radio station so small that we would do like lost dog reports and lost and found items halfway through the hour.
Lost dog reports. Were those helpful? Did people find their dogs from those reports?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Back when I was growing up and I was there in high school, there weren't that many radio stations that got over the hill. Mm-hmm. So everyone was listening to KPCW. I was a disc jockey, by the way, back then. I wasn't actually reporting. And one of the things the station offered is, well, we found this dog, or we have this item, or so-and-so on Main Street, found a wallet. And people would actually listen and find their lost items. That's service journalism. That's journalism.
Helping the people. I love that. So yeah, that was
it's been
something
downhill
I actually,
since then.
I wanted to ask you about that you worked for KPCW Park City, and it seems like you were younger when you did that. Was that the start of you realizing you wanted to be a journalist? Was it something you just did as a fun summer job, or what was the mindset going into working for KPCW?
Oh, it was just a fun gig, and it was a volunteer radio station. So whatever, I had my 3 hours a week shift. And then when I went to college in Portland, Oregon, to Reed College, they had the world's tiniest radio station, which you could barely hear on the edge of campus, like 2 blocks away. And I did a night show there as a DJ. And so I enjoyed like the radio technology and the performance, but I wasn't really thinking journalism. I was a science major. And it was only after I graduated and I was applying to grad school, as one does when you have a science major, and I was just looking for a volunteer opportunity in Portland. And I walked in, said, I'd like to volunteer. And they said, well, you should work in the newsroom. And the newsroom gave me a microphone and a cassette recorder at the time and sent me out to cover a story. And that's when the journalism thing really clicked. I hadn't written for a paper. I hadn't studied journalism at all. But this combination of the technology and the performance, which I was doing as a DJ, and the kind of gathering of information, which I was doing as a scientist, it really clicked. And the people were fun, and it was exciting, and I just got to ask stupid questions all day long, which was delightful. And that was it. That started the career. I volunteered for a long time, waited tables at night, and then got a full-time job back at KUER in Salt Lake City. And there you go. That's a career.
So when you started out working for KUER, once you started realizing more and more that you wanted this to be something that was a little bit more of a career, did you start out reporting in economics, or what were you reporting on for the most part?
Oh, not at all. I knew nothing about economics. I thought I would report on science because, I had studied neuroscience at college. But it turns out it's sort of hard to report on something that you know a lot about, because I wasn't asking the right questions. And I was, I'd go into science reporting and ask, well, why'd you choose this baseline and not that baseline? Just not interesting questions. So in Utah, I ended up, maybe because I was the youngest member of the staff, being an environmental reporter, just simply because I was willing to get up early and drive to Moab and then drive back at night, which is grueling. I would never do it now. But
wow, yeah, that's a tough drive.
Yeah, but at the time, I was willing to drive to every corner of the state for whatever stories were happening. And that's what I did. I just drove around and looked for fun feature stories, and went out to the desert and down to the Navajo reservation and, out to St. George and even into Nevada for some stories. It was great. I missed that.
So something that I think about as you said that is, I'm an entrepreneurial management major, so I'm always trying to think of a small business idea. And they're obviously not the same, but I feel like there's some similarity with trying to find a story versus trying to find an idea for a business. And I guess I was wondering, did you have times where you would try to report on a story, or you try to uncover some information, you do a lot of work and a story just wouldn't pan out? And how did you decide to quit on a story? Or I guess, how did you learn to hone that skill over time?
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. It is, I always put it in my science brain. I always said a story is a hypothesis, and you're sort of testing that hypothesis. And you go into a story thinking you'll talk to this person and this will come out, and you're constantly refining it as you're getting feedback from people. And people will be like, nah, that's not what the story is. It's really this other thing. And so you're constantly testing your assumptions. You're constantly reformulating your hypothesis. That's the way I think of it. But it's very similar to the business stuff too. In fact, I ended up, skipping ahead of the story, I ended up going to business school at some point. And now I often do talk about exactly what you're talking about, which is, to people who want to start a podcast, I often say to them, well, in business school, the first thing you do is who's your customer? What's your audience? What need are you filling that no one else is filling? How will you get the product to them? How will the money work? And so now I do put that entrepreneurial mindset into podcasting, which is, a relentless, if you're not solving, it's that relentless, if you're not solving someone else's problem, then your business will fail. And I think the sort of same thing now about podcasting. If you're not giving people something that they can't get elsewhere, then your podcast will fail.
Well, now you're getting me excited as an entrepreneurial management aspiring podcaster. So this is perfect. It's like you're speaking right to me. Thank you.
You should totally do that. Think of every podcast as a business. And I think the journalism and the product will be better.
Well, thank you. That's wonderful advice, and I think it's great for our listeners too. Okay, so I wanted to ask you about how you came to Planet Money then. So you just mentioned that you went to business school. Was that before you came to Planet Money, or was that after, something you realized you needed to learn before you did it?
So it was after, and the way the story went is that after covering the environment and politics too in Utah, I got a job in Seattle, Washington, and went there and ended up covering transportation and politics there. I moved into covering education, and then I got hired at NPR as an education reporter, moved to New York as a general assignment reporter, and then Planet Money was starting in the New York bureau. So that was my first inkling that I may be interested in business, just because the people starting it were, 10 feet away, and they looked like they were having fun. So I moved over there, and I was a host reporter for Planet Money for a long time before I went to business school. There was a fellowship called the Knight Bagehot Fellowship, which allows journalists to go to business school for a year. And I got that fellowship and went and actually learned how to do the math part of the things I've been covering for a long time. So it was good. So I'm maybe not a novice anymore, but I still try to pretend like I'm a novice.
And I think that's really interesting, and it's really helpful for me as a listener of that show, because I have always loved economics, or the idea of economics, but then I got into college and I had to take Econ 101, and I realized it's a lot more math, but Planet Money makes it just really exciting and interesting. And I wonder how you're able to do that. How do you approach an episode trying to make a podcast that's so accessible to people who aren't usually interested in business?
Well, a lot of members of the staff don't have a background in business and economics, and some of them don't even really care that much about business and economics. So it's good to have a hard audience. You know, it's not as if we're all wanting to jump on and do the stock report this morning because we're just so excited about, you know, what Tesla's doing. There's just a lot of people on the staff who say, well, boring, not interested. And having that critical side of your brain and being able to like articulate that you don't like something ends up being a really valuable part of this job. Jacob Goldstein is one of my co-hosts. He always says that like we have such short attention spans, those of us in radio, and that's our gift. That's our superpower, because when somebody starts blabbering on, I get bored easily. And I try to liven it up or ask a different question or go at it from a different angle. You know, if you're one of these people who could listen to like 7 hours of someone talking, you're probably not going to be a good podcaster, you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So hopefully I get bored more easily than all of the listeners, and I'm acting as a filter for them and just being like, nope, that's not a good cut of tape. Nope, that's bad writing. Everyone knows this part. Let's just skip this, take it out.
Okay, well, that's very helpful. Thank you. All right, so if I understand, you've been reporting in radio for the last 30 years. So you've been around for a really interesting period in radio where radio was kind of a standard thing for everybody. And then it started to decline a little bit with the rise of the smartphone, people listening to music on their phone more, less tuning into the radio. And then just, especially last year, this huge boom in podcasting. And so I just kind of wanted to hear a little bit about what that experience was like. Did you ever fear about the future of radio and wonder, oh man, I got to choose a different career? And what was it like when podcasting came about? Just what was your experience with all of that?
Sure. I definitely did the math. There was a point about 10 years ago where I was thinking, well, public radio and radio reporting is dying. And so I literally sat down and did the math and went, well, how many years do I have to retirement? And I figured I could still do this career until I retire. But when I would go to talk to journalism schools, I was like, well, I don't know if radio is going to be around, because the public radio audience, you know, I come from public radio, was getting older and older. And, you know, at some point, they're not going to be able to get up in the morning and turn on the radio. And so I thought that would be the death of radio. And so having podcasting come along, and more importantly, the audience just is so much younger. I think the audience for NPR is probably around average age of 52, let's just say. Whereas the podcasting audience, the median age is in their 30s. So that's like a whole new world and a new generation who likes the audio stuff. And so now, of course, I tell every journalism student I see, like, you got to get into audio. Audio is still expanding. Newspapers are struggling, but audio is great. There are more jobs than there are people we can find for these jobs. So I think it's livened up the whole profession. Now, we don't know where it's going. It may move away from journalism into more celebrity and fiction and, you know, roundtables and comedians.
We have seen kind of a rise in that in the last few years, haven't we? You know, like yeah. At first, I think those of us in public radio kind of owned podcasting because, you know, we were some of the few radio reporters left. But as it became more and more popular, you know, there's entire shows and networks, if you can call it that, in podcasting where nobody there's ever worked in a newsroom. Nobody has journalism experience. You know, they're just doing what they think sounds great. And that's good too. But I don't know right now. I think podcasting will remain huge. I think audio will remain huge. Whether in 10 years, what I do, which is, you know, journalism, interviewing people I don't know, taking a microphone and leaving the studio and visiting someplace, I don't know if that's still going to be around. It's still expensive, but
They may just all be comedians talking about dead bodies.
That's definitely a lot of what's saturating the space right now, I think. I was wondering though, so podcasting is such a unique medium, I feel, and obviously NPR has tons and tons of experience in the radio realm, and like you said, it's some of the best reporters and some of the, I guess, the last guard of journalists were there and then kind of filled the podcasting space. But have you felt like there's more room to explore and do interesting stuff in podcasting than in radio? Is there a different level of flexibility, or just it's different in the format and the way that it's delivered to the consumer? And I just wonder if that changes the way that you create it.
Yes, I mean, in radio, everybody has to listen to the same thing, so all the stories are short, 3 to 4 minutes, and getting shorter even on public radio. So obviously having different podcasts allows you to go longer, although you shouldn't go too long, but to go longer, to put more resources into it. The only challenge, as it always comes back to, is the money and paying for it, which is in order to be successful in podcasting, you do have to put out something regularly. Everyone thought at first they could be like, oh, I'm just going to work on something for 3 years and then I'll put out 5 episodes. And you don't really make enough advertising money to support yourself. So clearly you need to be regular. We're twice a week. There's a lot of shows that are doing 5 days a week. And the economics pushes us toward that. And the economics of a crowded field is pushing people toward shorter episodes that you might listen to in between other episodes or, on your smart home speaker. So in some ways, yes, we can do anything we want, but in order to make it economically viable, it's pushing us back toward radio and constraints.
Well, I would just say that I have had a lot of fun listening to Planet Money's experience and using their budget in fun ways, like a couple months ago when Planet Money bought a couple toxic assets, a few junk bonds as they were, and recently, as you guys reported on your superhero series, as you got a small budget to try and buy a Marvel superhero from the collection. Really, I just wanted to ask, what is one of your favorite stories that you've reported on in the last few years? Or what is something that stuck with you more than other stories have in the last few years?
Oh, it is hard to choose. We do have the entire team comes together. And, it's like any group of people where you're trying to top each other. It's like, oh, we should do this and we should do that. And we should buy a superhero. No, we should drill for oil. So that kind of keeps us, trying to do more and more interesting and outlandish things while still, answering fundamental questions. And a lot of it is realizing things you don't know. So when we did a series on oil, we drilled and bought 100 barrels of oil and then put it into a pipeline and refined it and ended up as gas. That came out of us admitting we didn't really know how the system worked. Sure, yeah, oil's in the ground, you pump it out, you refine it, whatever. But we hadn't seen it, we couldn't feel it, we couldn't picture it in our heads. And I did that with Stacey Vanek Smith, and we had just the time of our life driving through Oklahoma and Kansas, and eventually Missouri is where it ended up. And no, Nebraska is where it ended up. And just driving through, seeing the drilling and smelling the oil on our hands and seeing the pipelines and touring all the facilities. It was just like we were just so delighted and happy to see it. And people, who do this as their job every day are excited to talk about it. In a way, because no one ever asked them, you're a petroleum engineer and nobody asked you at a party like, oh, tell me in depth what you do. And now here are 2 people laughing and giggling and wanting to hear all about it. So it's just a great experience. So I'll pick that oil series as probably one of my favorite things to cover over the years, just because it was just it's just something that's in our life every single day, and to finally understand and see all the parts of it. Oh, it's great.
I love that. I think that's so funny that they were probably so excited to get to share about that. I cannot imagine that a petroleum engineer gets to tell that to anybody all that often, or to get to explain it to somebody who's actually interested to hear in it. And I think that's one of the amazing things about Planet Money is you're able to make it all so interesting. So I wanted to ask next about how reporting on economics and finance in your own life has shaped your views and how it shapes the way you experience the world around you. Do you think when you're walking down the street, are you always thinking about economics as you look at like a cafe down the street. Do you think that finance kind of shapes your view of the world, or how has reporting on economics affected the way that you see the world?
Yeah, I think you do start to see the stories and everything. So, in my neighborhood, I walk a lot during the pandemic, and I'm watching how some of the businesses that started right when the pandemic started are doing better than longtime businesses who couldn't adapt. There are things in my neighborhood. I live in Brooklyn, who have been open for 20 years, and they didn't quite know what to do with the pandemic. Whereas, there's a bakery that I think literally opened on March 1st of last year. And I remember shaking my head and thinking, like, these people are so unlucky, including the fact that they didn't get any money from the government because they hadn't been in business long enough to get a PPP loan from the government. So no support, no customers in the cafe, nobody allowed inside. But they pivoted because they had to. Like, they just had no money left. And they pivoted to selling bakery items out of a window on the street. And just this last Saturday, I noticed a line down the block to get the stuff.
Wow.
Like, they are winners. They are going to survive this thing, and probably stronger than companies that have been around for 20 years and got loans from the government. And so that's like, I'm looking at that, and that may end up in a future story because there is some research that shows that businesses started during a downturn end up being more successful, right? They're leaner, they're smarter, they're scrappier. It's self-selective for the people who really want it. And you're actually catching the growth part, right? You're starting at the bottom. The growth is kind of built in, although it's obviously scarier.
Absolutely.
It's not
more risk,
not anything
for
I
sure.
would do, but I think we'll see more stories about that. And if I start to see maybe one or two more things, then that will go together into one whole episode. So I just laid out how the episode would go, right? I saw this place. I thought it was going to fail. Then I noticed there's a line around the block. What's happening with that? Interviews with them. Some of the experts talking about what we know about businesses during a recession. Maybe another example of one that tried and failed. So we have both sides. And I don't know. Like, that could be a fun episode.
I think it sounds great, and I think it's really exciting that we get to break a Planet Money preview exclusive right here on the Measuring Success Right podcast. Thank you, Mr. Smith. We really appreciate that.
But once again, I have a whole team who might tell me, like, that's obvious, it's boring, don't do it. So you never know. You never know. This may be the only place it appears.
Well, I hope I get to hear it. I just think that would be fun for the bragging rights. That's an interesting question, though, about the team. I wonder, is it hard to work in a large group? Is it something where you butt heads sometimes, or do you think that it's mostly amicable? Is it tough to sometimes have a vision of a baby of a story that you really want to nurture and see be fully fleshed out, and then you can't do it because of the team or something? Is that something that ever happens?
Oh, yeah. It's heartbreaking.
I see the sadness in your face.
And we argue a lot. And but I miss them because I don't see them anymore. We used to all argue in one room, and now we argue over Zoom. But yeah, there's a lot of that where someone's just like, I don't think it's a story, or we already did that, or I don't think it's going to work for this, and this reason. And you get upset, and you're just like, but they don't understand. It's awesome. But they're probably right because they can see it from the outside. I've been thinking about, this bakery because I walk by it every day, and, it's in my neighborhood and I'm invested in it. But, one of my co-hosts in Los Angeles might just be like, who cares? Like, who cares? Like a Brooklyn bakery, boring. So because we want our listeners to come from all over, I need someone to tell me when, like, a story is too Brooklyn or, too simple or too obvious.
That makes sense, and I think there's a good parallel there to entrepreneurial management, which is something that we're taught often, is that when we come up with an idea ourselves, we often can struggle to accept that it has faults, or if somebody else tells us, no, you have a bad idea, we just sometimes don't want to hear it, and it can lead to a lot of pain down the line if you're not able to kind of accept that feedback earlier. True. And try and find ways to pivot or just give it up entirely.
True. And I think, I learned this in business school, that your friends will lie to you and your family will lie to you. and we'll say, "Oh no, that's a great idea. It's so special," and they're just being nice. You have to find people in your life who are honest, and you have to go to the customers who don't care about you and your story, who don't care where you live. They're the ones that are going to turn off the podcast or not buy your product, and they don't give it a second thought. You know, they're not polite people. The audience is not polite.
The best way that I've found to humble myself or take myself down a few notches is try and pitch a product idea to a stranger. It's brutal. They eviscerate me sometimes, but it's great. It's always helpful.
Good. Yeah. That's the way to do it. And you know, it's funny because I have to tell this all the time to radio people who often are in radio because they don't understand business. That you know, you're not doing a story for yourself. You're not starting a podcast for yourself and your friends. I mean, you can, but like, you want strangers to listen. And if you're not thinking about them, if you're just thinking about yourself and what you want, then I guess that's a hobby and 10 people can listen to it, but you need to be relentlessly focused on the customer or the listener, as we say. But it's the same thing. It's the exact same thing.
I love that. This is making me so excited. My business brain is just going off right now. Thank you so much for that. So I think that this is a great place for us to come to a close a little bit. I've had so much fun being here with you today, Robert. But before we go, I wanted to ask you the question that we use to close every interview, which is, what does success mean to you, and how do you measure success in your own life? It's a big one.
I knew you were going to ask it, and yet I didn't really have an answer. I'm going to steal an answer from a coworker of mine, Robert Krolwich. Robert Krolwich, who worked for NPR but was also the co-host of Radio Lab, a famous radio guy. He's been doing this for 50 years. Amazing radio professional, and he used to sit 2 or 3 seats away from me in the New York office. And I would always talk to him about opportunities and how do you decide, you know, when there's a forked path, you know, which one to take. And he had this great advice, which was, he's like, success isn't about your best day. So when you're thinking about like a new job or what to do, don't think about the award you're going to win at this one, or, oh, this one, like there's 4 million listeners to this show, or on this one, I'm going to make a ton more money, or I'm going to have these opportunities, because you can't compare your best day. He's like, you should always think about, what are you doing on Tuesday at 11 o'clock in the morning when nobody's watching, when you're not on stage, when you're not broadcasting, when you're not winning an award. Tuesday at 11, you're just doing the job. You're writing or you're interviewing. You're just like head in the job. He said, compare different jobs, different opportunities to how happy you're going to be Tuesday at 11 o'clock. Because that's most of your life. Most of your life is not the big moments. It's just the everyday moments you don't think of. So really, like, if you like what you do, like at the tiniest moments, then you are successful. So thank you, Robert Krolwich. I stole it.
Yes.
And I credited it.
You gave credit. That's perfect. I also am a big fan of his.
Go.
I love Radio Lab. Second favorite podcast. Absolutely.
Nice.
Planet Money takes the number 1 spot. Thank you so much for that insight. And there is honestly nothing that I'd rather be doing on Tuesday at 11 than interviewing you right now. I am just so grateful that you would come onto the show. Thank you so much, Robert Smith.
It was my pleasure. Anything for BYU.
We are so grateful for that. And thank you so much to the listeners for tuning in today. This has been Measuring Success Right from the Marriott Student Review. If you want to check out Planet Money, we'll have a link to that in our show notes. I'm Grant Frazier, and we will see you all next time.
Make sure you subscribe to our podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, or SoundCloud so you never miss an episode. Be a friend and tell a friend about Measuring Success Right.
This podcast is a project of the Marriott Student Review at Brigham Young University. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Marriott Student Review or online at marriottstudentreview.org.